All right, welcome to the Money Puzzle. I am Brian, that is Chris, and that is Eric. And this is really part two of, it's not a series, but it's really part two. What we started last week, and this is sort of DIY. We're calling it just DIY mistakes. And so last week we talked about the investments and just common mistakes we see folks make when it comes to their investment portfolios. And this week we're generally talking about planning mistakes. So that's a broad range, I know. Yeah. But if you watched last week's show, if you didn't catch it, go back and watch it. If you watched it last week, you know what we're going to reference, and that's talking about just your overall puzzle. If you guys know, if you watched this the last couple of weeks where you rebranded this podcast to the Money Puzzle, and the Money Puzzle is exactly what we say it is. It's right. It's a bunch of pieces of that make up your puzzle, and they can range anywhere from financial planning to investments to risk. They're all over the wall, actually. I think, Miss Producer, can you throw some of those pictures up there for us? So you can see on the wall, we've got there's Social Security, pensions, wills, trusts, all that good stuff. But that's really what makes up your money puzzle or your puzzle. But just know that depending on what phase of life you're in, it can change. So if you're in the accumulation phase of life, your puzzle may be made one particular way. When you transition to the income phase of life, your puzzle can change. And so what we thought we would do is start to run a series of shows talking about the specific pieces of a puzzle, right? Yep. And so this week we're talking about general planning. And we're going to talk about some of the specific pieces of the puzzle in this general planning, but just overall some of the mistakes that we commonly see folks make when they walk in the door. So just as a disclaimer, that's when they're not making the mistakes after they become a client. Well, it's only before they become a client. No, I mean, in all reality, we see existing clients that will do something without seeking our advice, and it winds up not being in their benefit. I mean, we see that a lot. Sure. Not a lot, but we do see it. And so sometimes we go, no, wait a minute, you should have called because we would have walked you through there. That's why we do a financial plan, because we can show you how that's going to impact you over the next 1, 3, 5, and 10 years. Until they're like, oh, okay, I get what you're talking about now. And so they'll call us. But with that being said, sort of first topic, which we see a lot of is what?
Not having a plan.
There you go. Not having a plan.
At all.
Yeah.
And what you see, here's what we mean by not having a plan. You see people that they get some of the major things, Social Security, which is a passion of Eric's. You see people talking about taking Social Security, but they're thinking about it on an island. They don't think about the way that your Social Security claiming decisions are going to impact everything else. They say, well, I can claim at 62. Therefore, I should because, and there's a break-even point that there's calculators all over the internet, and that's the only part they look at, but they don't look at all the other parts of the picture. That's what I would call not having a plan. You're just winging it. You're praying that you get it right. And the problem with that is you're not going to know whether you were successful with your failure to have a plan until it's too late.
Yeah, or not knowing why you're doing something. Yeah. So, I'll tie it back to Social Security specifically. Taking it at 62. Why are you taking it at 62? Just because you're eligible? Or why are you waiting until 70? Well, I want to max it out. Why do you need to max it out? What's happening up until the time when you actually turn 70, and how much are you drawing down on your investments? And so it's a huge, huge piece of your puzzle. Yep. But when you don't know the why, when you don't have the plan or the understanding about why you're making certain decisions, that means you don't have a plan. And so that's a huge problem.
It's a huge risk.
It's a huge risk that you're taking upon yourself. And you're, especially when you're messing with your retirement plan, that's something you really can't afford to get wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll add one piece to the Social Security piece that we've been talking about. Now, we talk about Social Security, but we really look at it in the form of this puzzle. We really look at it as a piece of the puzzle. Yep. Okay. So the interesting thing is we've released our background to our podcast, and there's actually a couple pieces on the wall. We've had a couple comments. People have replied back and said, well, you've got a piece that's out of place, because we actually have a wall piece that is, or a corner or edge piece.
An end piece, yeah.
An end piece or an edge piece that actually is not quite fitting in the right way. Why is it that way? Well, you might think, well, whoever designed it made a mistake. No, they didn't. The reason we did that is because we see a lot of folks that come in that, just like Eric and Chris were talking about, they selected to take Social Security at 62, but in all reality, when we do their plan, it's like, why did you take it at 62? You didn't even need to do that. you should have waited, delayed till 67 or whatever, and used this particular income source. Or if you properly do it the right way, you plant your seed at around 50, 55, and you've got you can reap the harvest at, let's say, 62, 65 years old and delay your Social Security benefits. But the only reason why you know how to do that is because you've sat down with a professional and you've allowed them to put their puzzle together, allowed them to put your puzzle together, if I can get that out right, to see how that Social Security piece fits in your overall puzzle. And I'll tell you, you can't make that decision in a vacuum. You can't say, well, I'm going to make it 62 because my neighbor did it, or whatever the case is. It has to be specific to your specific situation. So I just can't stress it enough. All right. What about taxes? What do you guys think about taxes? Where do we see?
So it's interesting that you were talking about the puzzle piece that didn't fit on our wall, because that puzzle piece actually is taxes.
Yeah.
When you go to look at the puzzle piece, it doesn't quite fit in.
Yep,
it's actually
you didn't mean to make that transition, but it was pretty good.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I just happened to look over, there it is.
Yep.
So many people think when you think about an investment plan or a retirement plan, everyone usually tends to be very focused on the investments.
Yep.
Obviously a very important part of your retirement plan, but really what people do not think about or neglect to think about for the most part is taxes. Taxes have a much bigger effect on your retirement plan than really the investments that you've got. Most people think, my biggest retirement expense is going to be like healthcare or housing or something like that. No, it's taxes. Taxes are the biggest expense you have in your lifetime. They're the biggest expense that you have in your retirement as well. Taxes don't go away. You're going to have to pay taxes until the day that you die. And then even after you die, you typically still going to have some more taxes as well. That's part of the estate planning piece of your puzzle, right? But we talked about in the last episode, and this made me think, because you were talking about common advice out there, planning mistakes that people made, and people say, contribute to this account or that account. Well, I'll use one specific example to extrapolate on taxes a little bit more. One of the most common things I hear is, I'm maxing out my 401k at work. Well, one, why are you doing that? Well, because I was told to do that. That's kind of the conventional wisdom out there. Okay, not horrible advice. It's good that you're saving, but as it relates to taxes, you're actually causing a really big headache on the back end of your retirement plan if you're front-loading your pre-tax retirement accounts and not really building any other type of accounts outside of that. You're not focused on the tax portion, the tax piece of your puzzle, so to speak. So when you neglect to focus on taxes within a retirement plan, you can actually create a massive tax liability later on down the road, that you're not thinking about today.
Yeah, I would go on to the same thing. I've had this example that I've used with people. You don't realize how big the burden is, that tax burden that's coming when all of your money was in a pre-tax 401k. Mm-hmm. People say, well, I'm a millionaire now. Not really.
No.
You're going to take out 25, 30% of that to pay taxes. I mean, realistically. So really, you've only got maybe 700, 750. When you put it in that context, people start to get that. I would also say that the diversification that we talk about in investments, that pours over into taxes too. You need to be diverse across different types of taxable accounts. Mm-hmm. They're taxed in different ways, traditional versus Roth versus non-qualified, for example, or taxable accounts, because I know what the tax code is now. I don't know what it's going to be in 5 years, much less in 25 years, right? So if you can position yourself where you have lots of different levers to pull based on what the tax code is, then you can minimize that tax burden overall.
Well, I talk about a three-legged stool a lot with clients, and you want to kind of build up each leg of the stool in correlation with the others. If you just have one leg that's longer than the others, that eliminates a few things, but it eliminates control in retirement. It eliminates options. I love options. I'm a huge fan of options, but it eliminates the ability for you to be able to control your tax liability to a further degree in retirement. If all of your money is sitting in a pre-tax 401k, well, that's great. You did a great job saving, good for you, but you only have one source of income. And every dollar that comes out of that source of income is going to be fully taxed because you weren't doing tax preparation or tax planning throughout your lifetime when you could still control those things.
Taxes are not something that you deal with in April every year. It's something that you should be dealing with all year long as part of your plan. And you should be looking at paying the minimum amount of taxes possible over a lifetime not over a specific year. And that's where you really have to have a plan to attack that.
Yeah, that's just point of clarification. Eric's talking about options having multiple choices, not options contracts. I know we're in the investment business,
good point.
So just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
We said love options. Okay, just clarify. Options meaning several choices.
Choices is absolutely, yes.
So,
Better word.
For compliance, we're not talking about options contracts, we promise. But the other thing I'm going to add to that is, and this is sort of going back to seek the advice of a professional, so I'm going to sort of blend these two together. When it comes to taxes, what we often find is that clients are seeking the tax advice from tax professionals, right? So they go to their tax preparer or the CPA and they're saying, hey, what should I do? CPAs, by just what they do, they have one goal, and that is to make sure that you pay the least amount of tax for that particular given year. And that's the previous tax year.
Because
right?
then you'll hire them again next year.
Right. Well, that's what their
job.
What their job is. And there's some other jobs too. But what often happens is what they don't take in perspective, we see this a lot, is what does that financial decision mean to you from a tax perspective this year, but what does it look like to you 5, 10, 15 years down the road? Exactly. Now, I'm going to give you an example. So my mother's generation, let's say my mother's generation to my generation, okay? My mother's generation, and let's say 65 and older, have maybe not had access to a 401k their entire careers.
Right.
And even when they first got them, they were really only putting in just a few percent of their overall salary. So they didn't really amass these huge 401ks. Well, we really, if you look at anybody 65, 70 years old, they don't have these big, giant 401ks.
Nope.
They just don't. Because they just didn't, and a lot of them.
They weren't contributing as much to it for as long.
Right. And a lot of it had to do with pensions, right? So these people had pensions and things like that. But now what we're seeing is so my generation, we've had access to 401ks our entire career. So day one we started working, you had access to a 401k. What we always taught, put in at least 10%, at least 15%, and then if you can, max it out. So we've had a lot of folks that have, over the course of their career, maxed out 401ks. Now, that sounds great, just what Eric was saying. That sounds awesome, and you're a saver, and that's wonderful. But again, you go back to the three-legged stool he's talking about. What we find is that one stool leg is gigantic, and by the time you're 70 years old, it's a beast that all of a sudden now you have problems because we do the planning piece of it, which again, going back to this the puzzle, where should your money be going? Where should your money be allocated? And it's not always to your 401k. The reason I say that is because we look at sort of our generation, especially ones that have maxed out 401ks, and you could have several $1 million in your 401k, and the required minimum distribution when you get into that phase is several $100,000, right? It can be hundreds of thousands in some cases. And so you're talking about a tax burden. That's a massive burden that you're going to be handed. So that is not always the best advice to say, go to my CPA. What should I do? Well, max out your 401k. Well, no, let's do a plan first. And that's where we really take upon ourselves is to make sure that we work with the client's tax preparer every year. We have a meeting designed at the end of the year where we have conversations with tax preparers to say what is in the client's best interest. Because we do some planning sometimes, and we'll show the client, look, you're going to have $1, $2, $3 million in your 401k, at the end of projected at the end of your career. And by the way, your RMD is $400,000 or $500,000. You're telling us you only need $100,000, but yet you're going to be forced to take out $300,000, $400,000, $500,000
and pay taxes.
And pay taxes on that.
That's exactly right.
At probably a much higher tax bracket than what you are now. So it can make sense to not put money in your 401k. Again, that's a puzzle piece. It's the 401k. How does it fit into my puzzle? As a matter of fact, I don't put hardly much in my 401k. I just don't. I diversify out. I'm still building the other legs of the stool. So I just choose not to do that because I've done my plan. I'm like, okay, I need to start filling up these other buckets and stop filling up that one. So we do give a lot of advice that, stop putting money in your 401k or reduce it down to the minimum so you get the match or something. But
I would go back to what we were talking about in the last episode was what you should do there is unique to you. You can't just look at that one piece of advice and go, that's what works for me. You have to get the plan, the puzzle put together for your puzzle because what's right for somebody else is not going to be the right thing for you.
Yeah. So we kind of beat that one up. But anyway, hey, real quick, Our phone number, 502-200-5210. You'll get Whitney on the phone. She can schedule a time for you to come in and meet with any of us. And we have another partner, Aaron. You guys see him on the podcast as well. He's not here today. I think he's driving around southern Indiana right now. But anyway, but if you've got any questions about any mistakes that you think you've made, or you have questions about how your Social Security will fit into your puzzle, or how your investment piece fits into your puzzle, or should you be contributing to your 401k, or what does your projection of your 401k look like when you're 70 or 65 years old, and you want to come in and meet with us, absolutely do that. We'd be happy to do sort of a complimentary plan for you to show you what that could look like, and then then we'll help you start to put your puzzle together for you. And that's really why we changed the name of the podcast to The Money Puzzle, because that's what it is. It is a puzzle, and sometimes you need help making sure that you have all the right pieces and that the pieces sort of fit together. That's really what we're here to do. So let's move on to risk. So we see this quite a bit. Yep. What do you guys see mistakes when it comes to risk? Risk, and we're talking about overall risk, not just investment portfolio risk, it's overall risk.
Well,
right?
I'll start with the investment risk part.
Okay.
You see people, they come in and they say, well, I want to get the best return possible. Okay, that makes sense until you look at the overall plan. Why would you take on more investment risk, for example, than what is necessary to accomplish the goal? So that's where developing the goal should come before developing the investment strategy. Why would you take on this much risk when you only need this much? If you take on that much and something goes wrong, the whole plan could fail because of bravado, maybe. So that'd be the first thing I would point out.
Well, unnecessary risk is something we never want to see in a portfolio.
Right.
If we can eliminate unnecessary risk, why chase a 15% return in your portfolio, which returns are great, but you're going to have to take an unnecessary amount of risk to achieve that. And on the downside, you could have a much larger negative consequence. But yeah, we definitely want to get rid of as much unnecessary risk as we possibly can when we don't need 15% when 6% will do.
Yep.
Well, let's tailor your
Exactly
portfolio to a 6% rate of return with a lot less risk. It's going to cause you a lot less headache from a day-to-day basis. So that's certainly a big one.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that, and then I want to add another piece to the risk piece, but is even if you can go, well, if you're worried about your portfolio risk, you need to find some way to measure it. You can't just look at it and say, well, it's a growth portfolio and this. No, you got to have a way to actually measure it. We have a portfolio, or we have software that will allow you to measure your portfolio's risk and then monitor your portfolio risk moving forward. That's you can measure it one time, but if it's going to change throughout time, and pieces of that little puzzle, if you will, all the components inside that portfolio are going to change a little bit. So you got to be able to way to monitor it. And we have software that can help you do that. Now, I'm going to transition a little bit away from investments and say that we talk about this money puzzle a lot, and we're going to continue to harp on it because we do feel like it's incredibly important. But if you look at a puzzle, let's say you have 15 different pieces of your puzzle, really anything financially related where you're making up your puzzle has some sort of risk associated with it.
Sure.
It could be real estate. It could be 401k investments. It could be your estate plan. It could be long-term care. It could be Social Security. All that has some sort of risk associated with it. So it's not just investments. It's not, I think one of the things that we so Chris and, well, actually all of us teach classes, and we have one specific piece where we talk about disability insurance. Yeah. And I have a scenario where I had a client that at one point he was new in town. You guys heard me tell the story. And he went through his benefits and selected his benefits for the year and didn't select disability insurance. He was a huge income earner. And I was like, that is the biggest risk you have because your largest asset is your income. Yep. That's the largest asset you have. And you didn't even insure it. But yet you would insure everything else. You insure a car that was $25,000. You insure your home that's $400,000 or $500,000 or whatever. But you didn't insure an income that's greater than
worth
any other.
Millions over a period of time.
Yeah, much greater. So again, it's all these different components that if you don't properly insure the risk associated with one piece of your puzzle, it could be a disaster. And I'll give you another quick example. This is one we were going to talk about. We may do a podcast on it all together. But real estate investment. we had a client years ago that got into a situation where he had some property. It was a land. It was a farm over near Versailles, actually, and had a house on it, and had some people that got into the house. It was a 200-year-old historical house.
Oh, gosh.
And got into it, snuck on there, and had been squatting there. You guys know what?
Yeah.
You guys know what squatters. Anyway, they were squatting there, and these people never went to the show, or never went to this farm. They went on the farm, but never went to this house. It wasn't.
They didn't
abandoned.
realize they had a squatter.
Yeah, they didn't realize, and the thing burnt, and they thought that somebody had died in there. Come to find out, it was like an animal or something because they had bones or whatever. But anyway, it was a huge disaster.
Yeah.
And it was like, and they didn't have it owned properly. They didn't have it inside of an LLC. I mean, it was a mess. And so they were really scared to death. And I said, you guys averted a financial disaster by about that much. And so, again, that's just another thing. It's not just risk in your portfolio. It's risk on all your puzzle pieces. And so that's why I would tell you, bring your puzzle to us and say, all right, here's all the pieces of the puzzle. Make sure that I have the proper amount of risk. Make sure you have the proper amount of risk. And make sure you're de-risking as much as you possibly can. And we can help you do that.
I'll even add one thing to that, too, because it's important to remember you're always going to have risk in your portfolio. There's always going to be some. There's always going to be some level of risk. I'll use another example because going back to real estate to some degree. So many of our clients come in and they want to talk about how best to pay off their mortgage. Okay, it's great conversation, a great topic to talk about. But if you do pay off your mortgage, you're reducing your liquidity. You're going to increase your liquidity risk because you're going to have less money in your cash flow or less money available to use. You're putting more money in an illiquid investment.
Right.
That's not necessarily wrong or bad. It's just something to consider because I'm going to run through a plan actually with someone this evening. And one of their big goals is to pay off her mortgage. It's a great and lofty goal, and she's been paying quite a bit extra every single month. But at the same time, every extra penny that she's paying to her mortgage is a penny that's not going towards some type of an investment. She doesn't have a ton of other investments out there. She really needs to focus more on her liquidity more so than paying off an illiquid asset, especially an illiquid asset with a really low interest rate. So there's always a combination of different types of risks within your portfolio. It's a matter of what's most correct or what's most proper.
It's spreading them out correctly.
Exactly. Yeah. Diversifying your risk. We talk about diversifying investments, right? We want to diversify your risk as much as we possibly can as well.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Social Security. So we'll wrap it up with this piece. So what are some of the sort of common mistakes we see clients make when it comes to now? This is I will tell you, this is a whole ball of wax.
Oh yeah,
I mean, we could go
down a rabbit hole on this one.
We can go down a whole bunch of them. But what are some of the more common ones?
The biggest one is taking Social Security, not understanding the rules. How is Social Security calculated? I actually spoke with somebody a couple of weeks ago that thought that Social Security was calculated based upon your highest 3 years of earnings. That's not even close to correct. But they were making retirement decisions based upon incorrect information, which goes back to the do-it-yourself problem, right? The other one that I see a lot with Social Security is, and like I said, there's calculators online that say, here's your break-even point. If you live to this point, then you are better off if you take Social Security early or late or whatever the case might be. It does not take into account all of the other factors. It doesn't take into account, people say, well, I claim at 62 because I want to claim while it's still there. Well, but they're still working. And if you're making enough money, and it doesn't really take a whole lot of income, Eric, you might know the number. If you're making enough money, the penalty that is placed on your Social Security while you're still working and you're below full retirement age,
if you're making about,
you could literally not receive a Social Security check because your income's too high.
The earnings test comes into play, and
Yeah,
if you make about $45,000 a year, you're pretty much going to forfeit your Social Security benefit. At least they got the 3 right when you're talking about based on the top 3 years. It's actually the top 35 years.
Yeah, 35. There's
a little bit of a difference
digit.
There. Yeah, I think the biggest mistake I see. I mean, there's so many when it comes to Social Security, but right off the top of my head, filing at 62 just because you're supposed to. Well, if you file at 62 versus 70, you're forfeiting about a 75% difference, 75% greater monthly benefit if you wait and delay receiving your benefit until the age of 70. You talk about figuring out, most people try to maximize their benefit.
Right.
So much of the industry is geared toward maximizing your Social Security benefit. Here's a secret, guys. If you want to maximize your benefit, file at 70 and live to 82. Done. That's how you maximize your Social Security benefit. Okay, that's great. What if you retire at 65? How are you going to earn income for the next 5 years? That's where that's where the planning piece comes into play. And we need to talk about how best to optimize your Social Security versus trying to maximize your monthly benefit.
It'd be really easy to figure out when you should do all of these things. And Eric, I've heard you say this in classes many times, and you're spot on. You tell me exactly the month and year that you're going to die, and I'll tell you exactly when you should file for Social Security, when you should start using certain types of investments for income. But as long as that's a variable, you can't just automatically go do it at this date.
Yeah. So the other thing I'd say about Social Security that we actually get into lots of conversation around is there's this a lot of prospective clients will come in the door, and that's the only. Well, I'll back up. So we talk a lot about retirement income sources, not a topic for today, but we talk a lot about permanent predictable income.
Yep.
That's one of the sources of income in retirement. What we find is that piece, everybody sort of, I don't know, saying Social Security is my only form of permanent predictable income. So really, when you get to 62 or 65, that's their only source that they have that they can flip on that is permanent predictable income. It comes in every month, and it's guaranteed. There are, if you properly plan, and again, this comes back to a puzzle piece, you can properly plan. You can actually set things in motion in your, before you retire, right, to produce permanent predictable income. Yep. That could maybe get you from 65 to 67. If that's when you retire 65, you don't want to return Social Security onto your 67. Well, maybe we can turn that source on for 2 years, right? Or get it started earlier so that you can delay Social Security benefits for a couple of years. You have to be able to go through all these different options to understand that sometimes taking income from other sources that you've put in place and delay Social Security benefits can actually be more beneficial to you and your plan. Here's and I'll say one other quick thing on it. A lot of times we'll show clients that your Social Security benefit, if you delay from 62 to 65 or 67, it grows on average 8% ballpark, right? So it's about 8% growth per year. Well, if your 401k or your investable assets are invested at a risk profile that's only going to get you 5 or 6, and maybe that's all you need, well, which is a better option? Well, you're much better off taking assets out of an investment that's only making 5 or 6 and delaying the benefit that grows at 8. But a lot of people don't even look at it that way. But you may only be delaying it 2 years or 3 years, and you don't have to. We're not delaying it for a lifetime. You're only delaying it a couple of years, and it can make a lot of sense. So again, that's just another example of how making sure that you understand how all the pieces of your puzzles fit, and making sure they all fit together. And are there options that you can put in place now to make sure that you have sources of income for later in life? Absolutely, but you got to know what your puzzle looks like in order to find out if you can actually make that work.
Right.
I want to add one thing too, because as we begin to start wrapping up, it sounds like we've been talking about mistakes, and the last 2 episodes, including this one, of course, have been around the idea of what mistakes we've seen investors make. It's very, very important to understand that if you've made a mistake, not to let that mistake compound upon itself and lead to other mistakes. We've all made mistakes. I can go through. Maybe we need to do a podcast about this one day.
That's a long podcast.
All the different mistakes that we've made individually. We've all made mistakes as it relates to finances and portfolio construction and things like that. So you don't want to let any individual mistake compound upon itself and lead to other mistakes. So if you feel like you've made a mistake, or you feel like we're talking to you right now, it's very, very important for you to make sure you come on in and don't make another mistake in the future. Don't let the fear of making another mistake inhibit your ability to properly put together a plan.
Yeah, and here's the other thing I'll say as we sort of wrap up today is, and we keep talking about this money puzzle thing, and we're going to keep going at it, and we're going to keep referencing it. And what we find sometimes is folks are a little hesitant to pick up the phone and call because they don't know what all their pieces of the puzzles even are, much less how to even start to put it together. And we've had folks that have walked in this door that literally have their pieces are scattered all over the place, and they've not even started putting their puzzle together. And that's okay. It's no different. We don't judge. We're going to say, look, we'll find out what all your pieces of your puzzle are, and we're going to put them together. We're going to help you put them together. So, again, it doesn't matter what your puzzle looks like. It doesn't matter how many pieces you have. You can have a few pieces or a lot of pieces, or you may not have your puzzle put completely together, and really all you need is help with just a final few pieces. That's totally fine. Or you may be somebody that says, look, I think I've got my puzzle pretty well put together. That's fine if you're just looking for a second opinion. Come on in, meet with us, and say, hey, I think my puzzle's put together, but I'm really just looking for a second opinion. But either way, again, it's all about planning and making sure you're seeking the advice of a professional and that you're getting your puzzle put together properly. I guess that's sort of the wrap on
and
the
I want
last
to add one more thing to that. What you don't want to do, this is another common mistake, is don't wait to get all your ducks in a row before you seek professional advice. That's kind of like cleaning your house before the maid comes over. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah. And a lot of people make that mistake. I want to get all this fixed before I come in and see people like you all. Get a professional involved now. Don't wait.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the hardest thing you're ever going to do is pick up the phone and call. That'd be the hardest.
Yeah.
The very first step's the hardest piece that you'll do. So anyway, that's it for another week. We appreciate you guys watching and following. And Eric's going to sign us off for another week.
Yep. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that red subscribe button there in the corner. Make sure you're the first to hear about any new content as we load it onto our YouTube channel. If you're listening on any of your favorite podcast providers, make sure you're leaving us a rating and or a review. That's how we get the word around about our show here. And, of course, if you would like to share any of our content with anybody that you think might benefit from any of the topics that we discussed, that would be very well appreciated as well. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week. The information given herein is taken from sources that IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, IFP Securities, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and or legal advisor before implementing any tax and or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors. This report may not be reproduced, distributed, or published by any person for any purpose without IFP's express prior written consent. Securities offered through IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, member of FINRA and SIPC. Investment advice offered through IFP Advisors, doing business as IFP, a registered investment advisor. IFP and Family Wealth Planning Partners are not affiliated. The information given herein is taken from sources that IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as IFP, IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and or legal advisor before implementing any tax and or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors.